Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 strange things that were found in the desert. Deserts are nature's perfect hiding places for strange things. The climate can be so hostile to traverse that few people will risk dying after a few hours of exposure in the hopes of finding something worthwhile. The lack of all life, even bacteria, in some deserts mean that bizarre and mysterious objects can be preserved much longer and more often than natural. The desert is also great for creating all sorts of novel flora and fauna. For unsavory types, the desert is perfect for doing nefarious things where there are probably not any prying eyes to worry about. So let's search the sands, seeking something strange. Number 10. Chinese desert patterns. In 2011, Google Earth users found objects in the Gobi Desert areas of China's Xinjiang and Gansu provinces that made the supposedly paranormal crop circles look downright quaint. While a few large buildings were quickly identified, the more intriguing and seemingly haphazardly designed collections of white lines carved into the ground defied any immediate explanation and came off as especially suspicious for having been made in remote areas. These were not small objects either. The Guardian reported that some stretched out for as much as roughly half a mile to 1.15 miles. The answer turned out to be a little ingenious but relatively benign. They're used by the Chinese government to orient their spy satellites and calibrate their lenses. Knowing the relative distances and angles for different portions of the pattern allows the satellite operators to know if they're reading certain distances properly or how well the focus is working. These, it should be noted, are not secret satellites, and it's not a practice that's unique to China either. There's one in Casa Grande, Arizona that serves the same purpose, which dates back to the 1960s. Number 9. Ancient Egyptian burial boat. For ancient Egyptians, it was a fairly common practice to include some sort of vehicle in the tomb. The famous tomb of King Tut has 6 chariots in it. Others favoured putting boats in theirs, and this was hardly restricted to the elites. Even the peasant class would put cheap but affordable reed boats in their graves with them. But one that was found in the Saharan desert after 4,500 years in the sands of the Abu Zir necropolis was quite baffling. The vessel, unearthed in 2016, was 60 feet in length, only about 6 feet shorter than a warship of the time. It was basically made of high-quality wood, hence it still being relatively intact when it was excavated. What was odd is that it wasn't buried in the grave of a noble or a general or anyone like that. Instead, the person entombed with it was a commoner. How could a peasant have afforded such a boat? How could the family possibly have afforded to pay for the equivalent of a destroyer to be buried with him, or even have transported it inland? The answer is unfortunately lost to history. Number 8. Desert graveyard for sea mammals. Speaking of graveyards, the mystery boat is hardly alone in terms of finding surprising burial places in the sands. In the Atacama Desert in Chile, there's a hill called Cerro Belina, Whale Hill, 40 meters above sea level, that during roadwork in 2010 was found to contain fossils of 40 whales, along with a collection of other marine mammals such as dolphins and seals, not to mention some fish related to swordfish. It initially seemed like an amazing case of mass fossilization. How could dozens of animals of various species have all died at once, and in so many cases have been so perfectly preserved? The most accepted explanation is that numerous mammals and fish were deposited over time, and that the hill in question happened to be in a place where the bodies were washed up. Then nature preserved them for 6 to 9 million years. The rather worrying suspect of the deaths that left them washed up on land was a spontaneous algae infection. True or not, it certainly left an unusual resting place for quite a menagerie. Number 7. Sudden Tunisian desert lake. We're all familiar with the trope of people who are exposed to desert climates for too long starting to see mirages appear out of nowhere. The concept, though, became real in an area of Tunisia 25 kilometers from Gafsa in July of 2014, when a lake seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was no small body of water either. It spanned about 2.6 acres and was estimated to be as much as 18 meters deep, according to the Digital Journal. Naturally, it drew mainly people who wanted to get relief from the heat, which could climb over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. For those who prefer rational explanations for seemingly anomalous events, the main option for a potential source is not good for the people who cooled themselves in it. Nearby, there are phosphate mines, and the lake potentially came from an underwater spring freed by the mining process. This, unfortunately, would mean the lake is likely contaminated with carcinogens, and potentially radioactive carcinogens at that. Still, the Tunisian government did not attempt to ban swimming in it. Number 6. Egyptian cone patterns. Let's return to Egypt now for a discovery that puzzled the internet when people began stumbling upon it in 2014 while using Google Maps. It was a spiral pattern in Egypt close to the Red Sea of clearly defined and precisely arrayed cone shapes, either as mounds or precisely sculpted pits. Overall, the pattern spanned 1 million square feet, with a cone 100 feet in diameter in the center. It turned out to be an art piece called Desert Breath that was finished in 1997 under the supervision of Danae Stratow after several years of work. It seems to have fallen in and out of the public consciousness, being rediscovered in 2009 as well. Stratow said he originally filled the pit surrounding the central cone with water to the rim, but it's perhaps not surprising that the water in a desert didn't linger. Number 5. Horned kangaroo fossils. In Australia's Nullarbor Desert along the middle southern coast in 2002, a dig found a collection of skeletons that the Australian Broadcasting Corporation described as weird kangaroos. They had not just digging claws, despite being larger than most burrowing animals, and kangaroos not being burrowing animals anyway, but also odd protrusions above their eyes. At first it was thought that these were horns, but that didn't fit with how little they extended from the forehead, so then it was suspected they were more likely an unusual eye guard. It was also noted by new scientists that the kangaroo skull shapes indicated they had strange bulbous noses, indicating they looked like alien kangaroo clowns. If that sounds creepy to anyone else, we can at least be reassured that the animal was a mere harmless herbivore. Number 4. Fairy circles stumped scientists for years. The name fairy circle might make you think of something with strange beauty or at least a little whimsy. In fact, it's more about a lack of life than anything charming. In the Namib Desert, along the southwestern coast of Africa, largely in the country of Namibia and in Australia, there are odd circles in the middle of areas of vegetation wherein perfectly fertile ground has no grass growing in it. It looks like something a conspiracy theorist would claim was evidence a UFO landed. More mundane theories, such as fires or winds being the culprit, were ruled out by the fact that these bare patches could last for decades, some remaining free of plant life for as long as 75 years. As recently as 2002, scientists were completely unsure, and it wasn't until 2017 that any viable explanation was put forward. The leading explanations are combinations of the circles being the former site of termite colonies, their even spacing is consistent with rival termite colonies elsewhere, and that plant root systems do this as a means of distributing water during inevitable shortages. Neither of these fully explain why the circles will remain barren for so long with no visible trace of colonies, but they are at least both a little more likely than these being the work of literal fairies. Number 3. Works of the Old Men. They were first observed from the air by British pilot Percy Maitland in 1927, but these enigmatic structures in Iraq haven't really captured the public's imagination in the way they deserve. In central eastern Jordan, near the Azraq Oasis, there are hundreds of wheel structures more than 80 feet wide, some as many as 200 feet wide, and their use is lost to history. The best guess is that these are cemeteries that date back millennia, but this has been disputed. Over in northern Jordan, the Black Desert possesses 2 such circles that date back a whopping 8,500 years, making them far older than the world's oldest known pyramids, and leaving behind not a single hint as to why they were created. As you can see, they often have rocks arrayed within them that indicate they're supposed to be symbols, but the only clue that anyone has found is that some are arrayed in patterns that point toward the rising sun. Similar but simpler shapes have also been found in Saudi Arabia. And while we're on the topic of Saudi Arabia, well, it has perhaps the largest number of these mysterious shapes. Large stone triangles were assembled, and so little is known about them that they haven't even been given a date of origin. There are also very tall pairs of U-shapes that have been dubbed gates, which have been carved into the ground or formed by assembling rocks, which number over 300, and they seem to be exclusive to Saudi Arabia. Perhaps we will never learn much more about them, and just refer to them as the Bedouins call them, works of the old men. Number 2. The unexplained gigantic Marree man. This 4-kilometre tall white etching near Adelaide in South Australia of an indigenous hunter about to throw a stick, usually cut into the ground about 1/3 of a metre deep and about as wide as an average road, was discovered in 1998. Since it was first spotted from the air, it's been uncertain who made it, how they did it, or why. The most likely person was Bardius Goldberg, but all that was known about it was that he said he'd wanted to make something like it. He claimed it would be visible from space, which this thing is definitely not, and had paid to have one designed. But there was no information about specifics such as equipment or people hired, and he died in 2002 before he was reached for an interview that could reveal whether or not he was the one who supervised its creation. Not that there is any shortage of local people who claim to have worked on it, but how they kept the creation under wraps for as long as they did remains unclear. Number 1. The emptied body of Ryan Singleton. Our final entry is a tragic one. In 2013, a 24-year-old openly gay male model from Georgia, Ryan Singleton, was found dead by hikers in California's Mojave Desert 2.5 months after he disappeared. His remains were a particularly grisly sight. His eyes, lungs, liver, kidneys, and heart had been removed. No evidence of a perpetrator were found, or even any leads as of 2016. Police, for their part, felt that the removed organs did not indicate that Singleton had been murdered by an organ harvesting ring. They attributed the missing organs to scavenging animals, though if that was the case, it seemed odd that, other than the missing organs, his body was generally intact. The family suspected that either Singleton had made an enemy in the entertainment industry, or his orientation had caused someone to murder him in a hate crime. If he had died of natural causes, no reason was found for why he would have died where he did. At the time of putting this video together, the investigation is still ongoing. So I hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also over there on the right, a couple of other videos that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.